Hi everyone, if you were looking to find some useful tips on how to cut down your costs to travel on a budget, you might just have found the perfect video for that. Since I've become a travel vlogger, everyone has been asking me, how can I afford to travel so much? Honestly, the answer to this question could be really easy because I just love to travel. So for me, it has been really easy to prioritize my spendings on this thing that I really like to do above anything else. But I guess this is not really the answer you're looking for to hear from me when you do ask me this question. So that's why on this episode, I'm going to break down some of my best tips to share with you how do I make this possible to happen. A good starting point would be to set yourself up with a travel budget. What to include and not to include in this travel budget is completely up to you. But the main thing to bear in mind is that you commit to that budget. Committing to a budget has been proved to be one of the most effective ways of limiting your expenses while traveling. At this stage, you might want to bear in mind that when you set yourself up with a budget, you don't really want it to be cheap, you want it to be realistic. I consider that to create a realistic budget, we have to bear in mind three key factors. The destination of your trip, just because inevitably some countries would be more expensive than others. The duration of your trip, because traveling is this weird equation where time equals money. And lastly, which season would you be traveling? Most people consider that traveling during high season or peak season is a great option to have the best experience, but most of the times traveling off-season is much nicer and more enjoyable because the places would be quieter and everything would be much cheaper. You might also want to have a look at the shoulders of the peak season when searching for flights, to always look at platforms such as Google Flights or Skyscanner, just because often these platforms have a nicer algorithm to play with where you can just keep tracking a few days, a few destinations, see the prices changing. Whilst if you do this search on a direct airline website, the algorithm of that website will learn that that will be something that you would be interested on and you might eventually end up booking it. So inevitably the prices will start rising from the moment you start your search to the moment you book your flight. When picking your flight, you might want to consider it to be an early morning, overnight flight, or a flight that has a scale. And yes, I know that traveling light is a really big challenge. Trying to be a minimalist travel, getting a backpack, always reducing the amount of luggage you bring with you can be really worth it. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the art of slow travel. This concept has been proved to be really popular within the youth network of explorers, purely for the fact that it is really efficient in terms of cutting down costs to travel on a budget, which consequently makes your trips affordable and that enables you to keep on traveling. To slow travel is actually to find the right balance between your time and your money. When you do make a plan, you kind of start breaking down your budget into the different days you will be traveling. So let's say if your budget includes flights on the first and on the last day, that budget would be bigger. If it doesn't include flights, you might want to spread it equally throughout the days you will be traveling. And then just always bear in mind that if you will be traveling for less, you would be able to enjoy it more whilst in there. So you would have more opportunities to have nicer meals or do more activities, for example. There are some really good options you might want to use. So the first one would be the traditional only caring the amount of money you have allowed yourself to expend on that day. The second option would be to download Expense Tracker. Expense Tracker is a really good app in terms of manually inputting your expenses. So you would always have like a summary at the end of the day. And then there is the option that most people use nowadays, which is rely on technology. I do travel with two different travel cards. Monzo and Revolut come with a lot of travel benefits, such as airport or luggage delays, medical insurance, as well as access to airport lounges. And by using these travel cards, I can always keep my expenses tracked down on my mobile banking app at the end of my trip, all these expenses become a folder which has the name of the country that I've traveled to, and then by clicking on that folder I can just have a clear idea on what have I expend my money whilst traveling. In regards to accommodation, there are also a few things you might want to consider. The first one would be what type of accommodation suits you best, and luckily enough there are plenty of options to choose from. In my case, I really enjoy hostels and the dorm spirit of sharing experience with other travelers, so in this sense my budget would always be more modest than someone who rather stays in hotels while traveling. Other thing to bear in mind is to have a very critical eye when picking your accommodation in terms of reading through the reviews, and you want to see what other travelers' feedback is on that accommodation. Then you might also want to be really careful when checking what each accommodation will include, whether do they have a self-check-in available, just because sometimes it might suit best your travel plan if you don't check in when you arrive, if you just check in at the end of the first day before going to sleep, whether bedding is included, because some accommodations do make money on charging the bedding for the night, whether breakfast is included or not. This might be good for those of you who don't really want to go out for breakfast and just want to get it out of the way to start rolling. And perhaps by ticking all of these boxes you end up with the best decision for your trip. But in some cases this might not happen, and if this ends up being your case, don't worry about it, because you will learn that mistake and on your next trip you will improve from it. It's also possible to cut down your food costs while traveling. My best tip would be to always eat around the corner. I mean, don't stick to the main touristic hubs when traveling. For sure there would be a good restaurant where you can perhaps enjoy a very decent meal for a way nicer price on a quieter place. Oh, you might want to avoid all those big chains that you find everywhere, because I know they might be really familiar and an easy option to go for, but in those touristic destinations, the prices of those products just fire up the roof. Also, eat at local markets, because these are organic products and the prices are way cheaper than fancier restaurants. Alright, my last tip at this stage may sound nonsense for some of you, but it is actually right. Do believe me when I say that drinking whilst traveling does take a huge chunk of your budget away. So if you can, do slow down the booze while traveling, because you will see the difference at the end of the day. But in case you are that party type of traveler, you might want to opt for draft beers instead of bottled ones, because they are often cheaper. Having a previous plan of what activities you want to do gives you a wider range of options that you have considered already. The more you know about the activity you're doing, the more likely you are to have picked the right option for your trip. Personally, I like to make my search over third-party websites. This doesn't mean that I will buy my tickets on third-party websites just because they are often more expensive than the original providers of each product. But when I search on these third-party websites, I make sure that I have a wider perspective of all the products that they have available and all the different packages that I can get my activities. And then when I've made up my mind of what I really want to go forwards with, I tend to redirect myself to the specific provider of each product. When you book your things online, you will definitely save money than if you end up buying your activities on the day and on the site. And when travel cards are available, they might just be the right option to go forwards with. I know it might seem a bit overpriced at first sight, but it ends up being a really good deal, because these travel cards often include all the popular activities as well as some discounts in shops and restaurants that might be really useful to save some money. And lastly, these travel cards tend to include all the public transports available and airport transfers. A heads up for families with children is that when you buy a travel card for an adult, this usually includes bringing a child along for free if you're not a family, but you are eligible to get a student or a concession discount. Always ask for those, because they would give you a discount price on the travel card as well as discount prices all over the place. So if you're traveling and you are eligible to these discounts, do ask for them because they end up being a really good deal. Well, and in the cases where travel cards are not available, there are a few things you might want to consider to cut down your costs while traveling. And the first one would be that walking is still free of charge. So don't forget about it. Then you might also want to consider your airport transfer. This would be the first time you would be taking a public transport when you arrive to your destination. Usually there are already preset options. They are very convenient for travelers, and for sure in these situations those options are overpriced. So if you do have the time to do so, do take a moment to make a search whether there is an alternative route you might take or another way of transportation you could get. And to do so, I suggest you to use Google Maps. I've been traveling around Europe and I've always relied on Google Maps. I have found this platform to be really accurate in terms of finding alternative routes and on giving me roughly your ride timetables for the departure times of each transportation. So I've relied a lot on this platform. Yep, that's right. My last tip is to be mindful because I do believe this is the future of traveling. And I say this not only because it is your responsibility to take care of our planet, but because setting yourself up with eco-friendly and vegan options tend to be a really great way to cut down your costs while traveling. Okay, so let me just give you my own example on how being a mindful traveler has helped me to travel on a budget. I do have a few eco-friendly travel companions that I love to bring with me when I'm traveling. The first of them is a reusable water bottle because it not only helps me to avoid an unnecessary use of plastic, but it also makes water free of charge. Secondly, I like to carry my own reusable cutlery set. This helps me to avoid getting disposable ones over and over again. And lastly, my tote bag, because initially my plan was to have it folded so it didn't take any space on my luggage, but if I did need a spare space to store some stuff, I could always unfold that tote bag and just put my items inside. But whilst I start traveling with this, I find this item really useful. So sometimes when I want to put my shoes inside my backpack to not get all the other items dirty, I just put my shoes inside the tote bag. Or when I end up traveling for longer, sometimes in hostels they do have those laundry rooms you can use, and my tote bag has been quite useful for this because I didn't need to get a laundry bag. I just use my tote bag with the dirty clothes inside to take it to the laundry room, and then after the laundry is done I just fold my tote bag backwards and I use the other space to put my clean laundry to bring it back with me. And lastly, it has a spare carry-on to bring with you to the cabin of the plane. In the overall, my main idea with this episode is that you end up being a traveler instead of a tourist, because being a traveler is to ensure that you have always opted for the best option available for you, just because to travel doesn't necessarily has to be an expensive hobby at all. And you know what? Just keep on traveling, because experience does comes in handy in terms of finding your best strategies to travel on a budget. And let's be honest, who you are relies a lot on how much you have experienced around the world. So keep on traveling, go further to be better, because to travel will definitely make you a better person. I honestly hope you liked this episode. Do leave your feedback below or hit me up on the DMs on my Instagram account, and I see you on the next episode.